Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Quarantine Collections. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we're so glad that you're joining us this morning on this virtual tour. We're going to be pulling out some things from the archives in just a few minutes. But on behalf of the entire Old Baldy Foundation, staff, and board of directors, I hope that you and your family are safe. I hope that you all are healthy and that you've had some semblance of normalcy during this mess, whether it's creating a routine or working from home, getting some exercise if you can go out on the beach where you're at or out in a park if you're not along the coast. We just hope that things get back to normal and we see one another on the other side of this pandemic healthy and happy. So I'm really excited about today because we're going to be spending the entire day talking about the Civil War. And if you know me, I'm a little bit of a Civil War nut. I just grew up not far from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So being so close to that battlefield, it just really groomed this intense passion for learning about the American Civil War and the folks who fought that war. And many of you are familiar, here on Baldy Island, we had a Civil War fort called Fort Holmes. And last week we visited one of the lesser known batteries or areas where there were cannons in that fort. You see, Fort Holmes was a 1.7 mile long earthen wall. You think of Fort Holmes making a roughly irregular circle around Old Baldy Lighthouse. But there weren't cannons every so feet on that 1.7 mile long wall. That would be a lot of cannons. And we discussed on the blockade runners that a lot of this technology, either it took an astronomical amount of effort to produce the technology such as cannons and ammunition here at home, or they had to import those arms and ammunitions from Europe through the blockade. So there are only 5 areas in Fort Holmes that have cannons, and we call those 5 areas batteries. 4 of those were numbered, and the 5th was known as Battery Holmes, of course, after the namesake of the fort. So today we're going to spend some time talking about the different arms and different ammunitions that we have here in our archives that kind of highlight the technology and the firepower, if you will, that was located here at Fort Holmes on Baldy Island during the Civil War. Hey, good morning, Mackie. It's good to happy to see and hear from you as well. And I just want to give Mackie a shout out. She's been a dedicated listener to these. And I also saw, Mackie, that you're going to be joining us for our historic happy hour. Yes, on April 8th, folks, we were supposed to have one of our historic happy hours here on the Lighthouse grounds with cocktails and a little bit of history and some fellowship. Well, of course, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to collect all together, but we are going to be bringing you that historic happy hour virtually, just as we've been doing our public programming here virtually. So if you go to our website, oldbaldy.org, or if you go to our website and sign up for our monthly newsletter, you can sign up to receive information on how to join us for that historic happy hour. In the newsletter, there's a free code. If you would like to pay the $15 as a donation to the Old Baldy Foundation, that would be lovely as well. Once you sign up, we're going to give you information on how to join our platform called GoToMeeting. On April 8th, that evening, around happy hour time, we're going to collect all together. We're going to be able to see one another via camera. Hopefully everybody has their cocktail of choice all ready to go. We'll catch up a little bit, see how everybody's doing, and then we'll delve into some history about the old boathouse that we lost during Hurricane Florence. We're going to be talking about the history of the boathouse, but more importantly, the memory, how we remember the boathouse and what that boathouse's legacy is moving forward. So if you are listening just like Mackie, give us a shout out there in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from, what your connection to Baldy Island is, and we'll be sure to interact and get back with you there. And if you have any questions, or if you're listening into the future and have some questions, put them in those comments there and we will definitely get back to you. Well, back to the Civil War. So in our collections, we have lots of these little guys. And we call them mini balls. What made the Civil War so deadly, with so many casualties, is largely the consequence of this bullet. This was pretty new technology during the Civil War, these mini balls. If you were French, I guess you would call them minet. A gentleman by the last name of Minet developed this technology in France, and it was rifled. It was a rifled bullet, one of the first rifled bullets ever produced. Now, what does rifling mean? Well, rifling means that we're going to etch, or we're going to create kind of, if I pull it up here, it's hard to explain, etchings, spherical etchings going around, or grooves, maybe that's a better word to describe it, grooves in the base of that bullet. And if I turn this bullet around, you'll notice it's hollow inside. So not only are we going to etch or create grooves in the base of this bullet, going around the entire base, we're also going to create grooves inside the barrel of the rifle or the gun that's going to fire this bullet. Within the base of that bullet, where that hollow space is now, there would have been a mixture of gases. So when this bullet was fired from the gun, those gases swelled in the base of the bullet. It made the bullet just a little bit bigger, large enough that the grooves in the base of this bullet caught or squeezed right up against the grooves that were in the barrel of the gun or the rifle, which created a spinning motion. So rather than just flying out of the gun, it spun like a football, if you will. It spun around. The grooves on the bullet and the grooves on the rifle squeezed together, creating that circular motion. Now, when you when you throw a football, we all know you want that football to spin. So whether it be a football, whether it be a bullet, when you make that bullet or football spin as it flies out of your hand or as it flies out the barrel of a rifle, it's going to do two things. First of all, it's going to increase the range or the length that football or bullet will go. And it's also going to increase the accuracy. You're going to be able to hit your target or reach your teammate much more accurately than you would if that football or bullet were not spinning. So a smooth bore, a bullet without any grooves, a gun with a barrel without any grooves, had a much shorter range, much less accurate. But when you have a bullet with rifling or those grooves that makes the bullet spin, it's going to be much deadlier. So the American Civil War is one of the first wars that each side, each army had this rifling technology on a massive scale. We're not talking about a soldier here and a soldier there that has this technology. We're talking about a majority, if not all the soldiers on a battlefield have this rifling technology. And that is going to, of course, dramatically increase the casualties during battle. So it's all because of this mini ball, this rifling technology, that the American Civil War has casualties in the thousands, battles with casualties in the tens of thousands. Now here on Baldy Island, there was no massive battle. There were not casualties in the thousands or the tens of thousands. Their enemy here on Bald Island is not the opposing army. In fact, it is the disease, it's the mosquitoes, it's the environment in which they found this fort. So their enemy, like our enemy right now, is not each other. It's not the armies. It's not the bullets. It's an enemy you can't even see. It's disease. And we're unfortunately all too familiar with that enemy right now during this pandemic. But just because their enemy was not these bullets doesn't mean that we don't find these bullets a little bit of everywhere. If there is one thing that we have in our archives or in our collections, it is mini balls. They have come up everywhere. In fact, in the mid-'80s, when there was an archaeological dig here on the lighthouse grounds, one of the objects they found the most of were mini balls. We have mini balls that aren't fired, meaning that that base is not hollow. We have mini balls that were fired and clearly didn't hit their mark, didn't hit their target because they're not dented. And then we have plenty of mini balls that are all beat up. There's mini balls in our collection that you can just tell what it is because it has that rifling. You can just tell the grooves, but it does not have this cone shape like the mini ball I have in my hands. Clearly, that's an indication that mini ball hit its mark. It hit the target. It hit the rock. It hit the tree. It hit the scarecrow. I don't know, whatever they're firing at. So these are with rifles, infantrymen, a gun just like we have today or you may have. But let's talk about the big cannons. Let's talk about cannons that would fire something like this, or I can barely lift up in my hand. That's where most of the firepower is going to originate or come from in Fort Holmes here on Bald Head Island during the Civil War. Hey, if you're listening out there, we got quite a few listeners. Give us a comment or a shout out in the comments here. I'm going to be following along on my phone. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear where you're listening from. We'd love to hear what your connection is to Bald Head Island. So give us a holler there in the comments. And I'll be checking out Mackie Miller. Trying to figure out why they are called mini balls versus mini bullets, because they are not shaped like a ball. Yeah, you're right. I don't really know. My guess, my educated guess, is that bullets previous to the mini ball were called balls or buckshot. So it's almost like that's what they were used to. So they just kind of continued that nomenclature. So that would be my educated guess, but I'm not quite certain on that. That's a great question, Mackie. So the cannons that were here on Bald Head Island, mostly in these 5 batteries or areas where there are large pieces of artillery in Fort Holmes, we have 24 pounders. And that is the cannonball that I just held up. It's the most common piece of artillery here on Bald Head Island. These are cannons that are pretty massive. In fact, when you think of a battlefield today, when you go to battlefields, you think of cannons that have 2 wheels on them. And you would limber that up to a horse, and the horse would gallop away, and those wheels would move, and you could move this piece of artillery wherever you wanted on a battlefield. Well, that is not the type of artillery that was here at Bald Head Island. This artillery is so massive, they're on barbettes, which is basically how you hold the cannon up against the cannon's wall. It is the engineering, the infrastructure, if you will, that holds that cannon in place. But the barbettes, unlike many cannons you're familiar with, don't have wheels on it. These cannons are so massive, they are so heavy. Once you got that cannon in place along the fort's wall, it wasn't going anywhere. In fact, when the Confederates evacuate Bald Head Island in mid-January 1865, the cannons were so heavy and are so massive that they are abandoning the cannons here, giving them up to the Union or the Yankees or the Northern troops. There's not enough time, there's not enough resources to move these massive pieces of artillery. Karen Mortimer, hey, good morning, Karen. Good morning, I'm here for another great lesson. Are we going to have a test later? Yes, meet us at Chris Webb's house and we'll make sure that you get a test, and hey, if you pass the test, there might be a cocktail or two in for you. So swing by, Karen. How big are we talking about? How many pounds are these 24-pounders? Well, the 24-pounder name is not meaning that it weighs 24 pounds. In fact, these 24-pounders weigh over 5,000 pounds, sometimes 6,000 pounds. So that gives you an idea. Once that cannon's in place on the fort's wall, you're not moving it anywhere. The 24-pounder name comes from the idea that it fires a 24-pound cannonball. And that's what I'm holding up here. We have 3 in our collections. It has a diameter of about 5.6 inches. It weighs about 24 pounds, and it's known as solid shot. This is a solid shot, meaning that there's nothing inside of here. It is solid. So the idea is that you're going to be firing a 24-pounder solid shot against something that you want to destroy, whether it's a wall, whether it's the side of a ship, because it's not exploding. It is just going to crash into whatever it hits and hopefully destroy it. Like I said, whether it be a wall or a ship. Sometimes you would have little smaller cannonballs in this. Or you would pack this with a cannonball. That's called a shell. And the idea is that you set a fuse. So it's like a timer, a fuse. And if a 5-second fuse is set, that means 5 seconds after this cannonball leaves the barrel of that 24-pounder, it's going to explode. It's going to explode in a variety of pieces, and those pieces are going to rain down on the troops, causing a significant amount of damage. So, solid shot, you're trying to destroy something, a wall, a ship. With a shell, you're trying to destroy someone. You're trying to inflict as much damage when that cannonball explodes. And we only have solid shot in our collection. We, like I said, have 2 others of these. Again, coming from 24-pounders, which are the most common pieces of artillery that we have here in our collections. Now, at Fort Holmes, there were also 32-pounders. It's the same kind of concept. They're a little bit bigger than 24-pounders. They are firing a 32-pound cannonball that we don't have any examples, unfortunately, in our collections. Maybe we'll buy one, Chris, if you're listening. And they weigh about 7,000 pounds. So again, just a little bit heftier, just a little bit bigger than the 24-pounders. One of the largest pieces that we have here at Fort Holmes during the Civil War are what we call Columbiads. Now, Columbiads is just a fancy word for, again, one of those bigger pieces of artillery. But what is amazing is, so we're talking about 32-pounders weighing roughly 7,000 pounds. The Columbiads here, they weighed 8,000 some pounds. Some of them, if they're rifled, meaning that again inside the barrel they have those grooves that's going to make that cannonball spin once it leaves the barrel, they're going to weigh 15,000 pounds. Can you imagine, without much technology, trying to place a cannon on Bald Head Island that weighs 15,000 pounds? It would have been a ridiculous endeavor to try to get that into place. Helen, good morning. No test, please. Enjoying all the great history. Thank you. Hey, I think Karen's the only one that asked for a test, so we'll make her endure the test. And Helen, we'll just enjoy your company. But you can come by for the cocktails if you'd like. Now, not all of our cannonballs look like a ball. Some of them might be reminiscent of that mini ball. can see here, this is one of our larger pieces. I'm struggling to hold this up. Karen or Helen, I might need your help. Come on over. That's the test, if you can help me hold this up. This is called a Parrot projectile. It comes from a Parrot rifle. And Parrot rifles are, again, another piece of cannons, another example of these different varieties of cannons. Parrot rifles can be on a barbette. Again, that term barbette is the idea that once that cannon is in place, you're not moving it. But Parrot rifles can also be on that traditional sense of you're placing it on two different wheels and you can maneuver that cannon wherever you want on the battlefield. Now, we did have an artillery company here on Baldy Island that had 4 pieces of artillery, or 4 cannons, that did move around on the island via wheels. And they have a really cool story. They're called the Edenton Bell Battery. We had a listener on Sunday when we were at the chapel from Edenton, North Carolina. Edenton is way up north along the coast. It's about as far away from Baldy Island as you can get on the coastline of North Carolina. It's up on the Sounds, up towards Virginia. And the Edenton Bell Battery has the word bell in their name because when the Civil War breaks out, this town, they want to create an artillery unit. But since the South does not have the infrastructure, Mackie Miller, if the 24-pound ball was going to explode, I'm working on this, Mackie, it was going to explode in 5 seconds, what was the maximum distance it could travel? Wouldn't a ship, for example, be far into the ocean? Sometimes it was far into the ocean, and sometimes it wasn't. When you think that there's this great story called the disaster of the Ella, or when one of these blockade runners called the Ella crashes aground on shoals not far from South Beach. So that ship, the Ella, wasn't far from our coastline, and there's a mad dash from the Union side and from the Confederate side to salvage what they could off of the ship. And let me elaborate on that. The Union are trying to reach the Ella that is grounded just offshore of South Beach because they want to destroy that ship and anything aboard the ship. The Confederates are trying to reach the Ella that has crashed aground offshore because they're trying to salvage those precious war materials that they've spent a lot of resources and a lot of manpower getting from Europe. So it's a race. Who can reach the Ella first and destroy or salvage the resources? Well, the 24-pounders at Fort Holmes, they could easily reach the Union warships that were trying to destroy the Ella. At the same time, those 24-pounders are being used to defend the Confederates. They're trying to board the Ella to salvage those goods. I'm trying to come up here. I don't know off the top of my head the range for a 24-pounder. There we go. The velocity of the cannonball is about 1,500 feet per second. So that's a no insignificant range. It varies depending on the weight, it says. And I'm thinking that it has a range of a mile or so. I'm thinking that Columbiads had a range of about 3 miles, and Columbiads were some of the larger pieces of artillery here at Fort Holmes. Now, 24-pounders are not going to have the range of a 24-pounders are not going to have the range of a Columbiad. So if a Columbiad has a range of about 3 miles, I'm thinking a 24-pounder has a range of about a mile or 2. But I definitely will get back to you, Mackie, in the comments, so stay tuned to that. Yeah, so the Edenton Bell Battery, why they have the name Bell is because when they're creating this artillery company in Edenton, North Carolina, there are no resources in little old Edenton to create 4 cannons from scratch. So various courthouses and churches and schools in Edenton donate their bells. They send those bells to Richmond, to a place called Tredegar Ironworks. They melt those bells down and create 4 cannons for this artillery company coming from Edenton. And then they name each of those 4 cannons after the bell in which was donated to produce the cannon. So the Edenton came from the county courthouse in Edenton. The Columbia came from a little town called Columbia, which is not too far from Edenton, across the Sound. The Fanny came after a woman that was a great figure in the Methodist Church that donated their bell. And then the St. Paul came from the Episcopal Church, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, Edenton, when they donated their bell. So kind of an interesting story. They serve in the Army in Northern Virginia, and then they eventually find their way to Bald Head Island. And it is these 4 pieces of artillery that are not on a barbette, that are mobile on wheels with horses or heaven forbid, men pulling them around. They go up and down the island, from the western edge along the river out to the Cape on the eastern side of the island, taking pot shots, any opportunity they can. When one of those Union warships gets just close enough to shore, they're going to take a cheap shot, I call it, a pot shot out there to try and inflict some damage on the Union warship. So it is these Edenton Bell Battery cannons that would have fired something like this, that would have fired a projectile from a Parrott rifle, for an example here. And you can see it is quite heavy, so we're very lucky to have this in our collection. So you might ask, are there any other pieces of artillery here on Fort Holmes? We talked about the 24-pounders. We talked about their brother or sister, if you will, the 32-pounders, each of those firing that pound of shot. We talked about Columbiads being one of the largest pieces of artillery here at Fort Holmes. And then we talked about the Edenton Bell Battery. Well, there was one other one called a Brook rifle, and there was only one example of a Brook rifle. It was weighed 21,000 pounds, so arguably it was the largest piece of artillery here at Fort Holmes, and it was located at Battery Number 1, which is off of West Bald Head Line along the river, out there towards the point where the terminal groin is today, right around in that location. And you can notice that they're putting the larger pieces of artillery along the shoreline because, as Mackie was alluding to earlier, they wanted the larger, heftier pieces of artillery with the largest ranges along the shoreline, along the ocean front, in order to reach the Union warships offshore. Now, just as we were alluding to earlier, these cannons are so massive. In January of 1865, when the Confederates have to evacuate Bald Head Island because their sister fortification, known as Fort Fisher, collapsed or fell to the Union Navy and to the Union Army, there was not enough time to evacuate these massive pieces of artillery. There weren't enough men, there weren't enough resources to get these pieces of artillery back to the mainland. So they largely abandoned everything. And that is why we know what was here at Fort Holmes. When the Union took over Fort Holmes, one of the first things they did was to create an inventory, to create a survey of what the Confederates left behind. And they meticulously noted what was left behind, and that is the primary resource that we use today to educate all of you folk about what was here, what type of artillery and ammunition was here during the Civil War. Now, you might ask, what happened to the Edenton Bell Battery? Well, it has a fascinating kind of conclusion. They evacuate all 4 pieces of their artillery. These are mobile, remember, on the wheels. And they lose 2 of those at Town Creek. If you're familiar with Bald Head Island and you may be commuting to Bald Head from the northern area, from the Wilmington area, when you're traveling down 133 or Route 17 and reach Bald Head Island from Wilmington, you eventually cross Town Creek. It's a little creek that is an offshoot of the Cape Fear River. There was a small battle there in February of 1865, and the Edenton Bell Battery lost 2 of their cannons. Then they disappear once they're captured by the Union troops. They disappear from history. No one really knows what happens to them. They eventually are found in Old Fort Niagara up in New York. Somehow, when the War Department was collecting all the guns that they had won or they had captured during the Civil War, the War Department transferred 2 of those pieces of artillery up to Old Fort Niagara. And in 2001, there was a ceremony in Edenton in Old Fort Niagara, where the St. Paul, one of those pieces of artillery, the St. Paul's Episcopal Church melted their bell to create that cannon. They gave the Edenton Historical Commission that cannon back. And now you can see 2 of the cannons from the Edenton Bell Battery along the waterfront there in downtown Edenton, next to the Penelope Barker House, which is their visitor center. And it's really cool to visit that site because you can think, wow, these cannons at one point or another served on Bald Head Island during the Civil War. So this afternoon, we're going to be going out to battery number 4. I'm going to show you where some of these cannons were placed during the Civil War. And we're going to be showing you a magazine, which is basically a man-made cave where they would have stored all the ammunition like this 24-pounder cannonball. So join us this afternoon. I also want to let you know that we have a really cool book if you're, a grandparent or you're a child listening. We have this great book, Life on a Civil War Battlefield. It's available in our gift shop. If you email Jess, Jess, at oldbaldy.org, she will take care of this for you. You can purchase this book for great reading material while we're all self-isolating. And she could even get it same-day shipping if you get a hold of her before 3 o'clock every day but Sunday. So thank you for joining us. I'll let you know that you can see these broadcasts or any past broadcasts via Facebook Live. You can see them on Instagram TV. And also you can go visit our YouTube page. And we would love if you hit subscribe. If you subscribe to our YouTube page, it's kind of like following in Facebook terms. I'm learning all this new lingo and technology. I'm not a millennial when it comes to technology, so subscribe to our YouTube page. We really appreciate it, and you can see all our past broadcasts. You can also see all the future broadcasts, but we're not going to stop anytime soon. So thank you for joining us. I hope you learned a little bit about Civil War artillery and technology that was here during the Civil War on Fort Holmes on Bald Head Island. Join us this afternoon to learn just a little bit more, and we'll be back tomorrow with some more topics and more history for you all. So thanks for listening, and you all take care out there. Be healthy and be safe.